Porsche recommends a valve adjustment every 3,000 miles, and here's how I do it. To begin, make sure your engine is cold and put the car in the air. And to make it easier to see the process for this video, my engine's on a stand. Alright, so when you're under the car, obviously you have much less area, much less room to work. And it'll be pretty tight in here. And you really won't be able to reach up and pull with your hand. You may be able to get some sort of pry bar in there, but I haven't had a lot of luck with that. So one of the tricks that people have been talking about on 914 World for a while is to just take a rag under the car and then a screwdriver where you don't need to have like a tremendous amount of leverage, and then just pry up and pull at the same time. And there you go. And now you can access the valve chamber. Okay, what we have here are the intakes on the inside and the exhaust valves on the outside. This is cylinder 1, this is cylinder 2. We're going to work on one cylinder at a time, but the process is the same for each cylinder. It all begins with putting the cylinder at top dead center so that we have a situation where the springs don't have any tension in them. Top dead center is when the piston is at the top of its compression stroke. When this happens, the intake and exhaust valves are closed so that when the spark plug ignites the fuel, all of that force has nowhere to go except to push the piston. So we need to be at top dead center to do the valve adjustment for each piston. And I like to start with number 1 since there are clear marks we can line up for reference. Now there are a couple ways to do this. One way is to look down at the fan and line up the 0 in the notch. Another is to push back the tin at the back of the engine so that you can see the flywheel, and then line up the notch on the flywheel with the split in the case. Once that's lined up, now's a great time to put a mark on the flywheel 180 degrees from that notch on the bottom. And there's a little viewing port where the transmission meets the engine, and you can get a small brush or a permanent marker in there. Remember, on the Type 4 engine, the flywheel goes around twice for every complete revolution of the engine. So to be really sure you're at top dead center of number 1 and not number 3, which is 180 degrees around, pull off the distributor cap and make sure the rotor is pointing to where the number 1 spark plug wire attaches. On most engines, that means the rotor will point in the direction of the fan viewing port. Some distributors may be installed differently, so follow the spark plug wire to number 1 to be sure. Now that I'm totally sure that I'm at top dead center of number 1, I'm going to loosen up the adjusters for the exhaust and the intakes so that I can get things set. So you can see there's space in there. And what we're trying to do here is to adjust the play on the exhaust and the intakes here so that it's within spec for your engine. Now here's where it's important to know what your engine specs are. Recommended valve lash can be different depending upon which engine and push rods you have. Also, this procedure is for solid lifter engines. If you have hydraulic lifters, that's another video. For illustration purposes, let's assume that this is a 2-liter engine and the exhaust needs to be at 8 thousandths. So what I'll do is I'll take the feeler gauge and I'll put it between the adjuster and the top of the valve stem. I don't want to like contort this feeler gauge. Try to keep it as straight and flat as possible. Then I'll turn the adjuster in so that I get just a little bit of drag on the feeler gauge. Not too much, just a little. And then once I have the right amount of drag there, I'll just tighten this nut. Now hold the adjuster stable while you tighten the nut. Or if you find that the adjuster moves when you're tightening, back off the adjuster just a little bit to compensate so that when you tighten it up, it comes back into position. So now we move on to the intake side. And for a 2-liter, this would be 6 thousandths is the spec. And same thing, I'll put the feeler gauge in there. It'll be a little harder for you to do under the car, but you'll be able to get it. And turn the adjuster until it just grabs a little bit, just like before. And then once that's all set, we'll tighten the nut down. Same way, and make sure that the feeler gauge stays consistent. And this is basically the same process for every single cylinder as you work around the car. My engine has chromoly push rods, and the spec for them is what's called loose 0. Okay, so let me show you loose 0. You see I put a little Sharpie mark on the push rod there? That's because in loose zero, the rocker has to be tight up against the valve stem, but not so tight that the push rod can't rotate. So you can see I can rotate it there with my pinky, and things are still tight up against the valve stem with no play. Now that we have the cylinder 1 valves done, we need to move on to the next cylinder, and to do that, we need to know the firing order. So looking at the back of the engine, this is cylinder 1, even says so on the tin. 2, 3, and 4. So the firing order goes 1, 4, 3, 2. And it says so right there, although I have it upside down. There, that's better. Zund Flolj. I guess that means firing order. So how do you rotate the engine with your car in the air? Well, you can bump the starter until the next timing mark lines up. Or you can put the transmission in 5th gear, immobilize one wheel, and then turn the other one. You need one wheel to be completely immobilized so that the engine will turn when you turn that wheel. And this is where that mark opposite the notch comes in handy. When that 180-degree mark lines up with the split in the case, you know that you're at TDC on number 4 or number 2, depending upon where you are in the cycle. Again, check the distributor rotor. Now I know I'm top dead center of number 4 because that's where the rotor's pointing. Number 1 is here, 4 is 90 degrees to that, 3 is 90 degrees to that, and then 2 is 90 degrees to that. So always do this with the distributor cap off. You probably figured out that you can line everything up without getting out from under the car by using that little transmission viewport. But I still like to verify where I am in the stroke by confirming with the rotor. Even better, save your knees and get a helper. And after you've finished working your way around the engine, it's a good idea to check the valve chamber. Make sure that the retaining clip here for the pushrod tubes is sitting just on the tubes and not actually making contact with the push rods or the rockers. I put everything back together. See this logo here? Keep it upside down because that supposedly makes these covers less prone to leaking. Then take a pry bar or anything really that gives you leverage. That's it. Now you're ready to go. Like almost everything in wrenching, this isn't the only way to do the job. There's another method which involves 2 fewer rotations of the engine, and I'll put a link to that. It's called Captain Krusty's method in the description below. Personally, I like my straightforward approach because there's less chance for error, but to each his own. Hope you find this video helpful. Please hit the subscribe and like buttons. Be safe and enjoy.